Hi, Alex.
Hi,
Nice to meet you
Jeff.
again. How are you?
Yeah, good. Yourself? How's
Good.
Eastern Canada?
We still hope for the spring to come at some point. And on your side?
Yeah, same thing here. Not quite
Okay,
here.
cool. So, Alex, can you introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, I'm the lead product manager for access management at Indicate, former CDO at Three Edges, doing authorization for a while now.
Cool. And that's why I like to talk to you about all of that. I'm Jeff. By the way, for those who don't know me, I'm a security specialist at AWS. And I'm glad that we have finally giving the opportunity to anyone who didn't get the chance to come with us in Iceland, Reykjavik, at the OAuth2 security workshop to be able to catch up onto our presentation. So, like, ready to give the tidbits about what we talked over there?
Let's do it.
So, what was the topic, Alex?
So we want to reach better access control through OAuth2 client extensions in the GL tokens, as well as introducing a new flow called authorization step-up or authorization signaling.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of things. So why are we talking about that, Alex?
Yeah, so planet authorization, the planet, well, at least I live in and we live in, is kind of fragmented. We have two sides of the planet that don't really talk to each other. On one end, we have the authorization server side, the AS land, with a lot of, RFCs and specifications. I mean, there's just a few displayed on screen now, but we know there's over 100 of this, so very productive side of the planet. On the other end, we have our PDP land, policy decision point land, which is where I live. I live on this side, on that side of the planet, and there we have much less specification, from XACML to AuthZ. Currently working on AuthZ myself. So what we'd like here is to have those two sides of the planet hopefully communicate a little more and maybe collaborate and build standards together, or at least patterns and things, because we should really talk more.
So that's
Yes.
why I think into the topics that we had like three separate elements that we wanted to do. Like you said, we want to be able to talk, so we want like better access control out of that. And maybe for that we will talk about OAuth2 clients, like because it sounds like they are the poor child of the ecosystem around here, and effectively at the end the communication in between the three of us. So the main question that we got for the audience over there, I think, and that's the discussion that we have with all our customers day to day, is what is great access control? Okay. And generally the questions that we got, and again, I thank Brian Campbell for the picture over there, which is some kind of a drop when we are talking about those topics, is that most of the people think that it is like a decision. Like in this case, we don't want you to move forward to perform the actions that you were aiming to do because something. While in fact, for us, like the people who are implementing all those kind of controls, what we want really behind the scene is to have like actionable data. We want to be able to understand in which context you try to operate, what are your characteristics, both as a client, but also maybe as a user, or the type of resources that you want to access. Like if I take back the analogy of you want to go onto this trail, what we want to know if you are well equipped or if you are vetted by some certification, or if you have good intention, or maybe if it's the right time to just go over this trail. So if we talk about in layman's terms here, if we are giving less of an analogy and more about the user and use case and customer stories that we see, we were able like to split four different type of things. The first one is like airline company, for example, so they are using um, like authentication in order to access gate like the booking of tickets for your next travel, and sometimes they might have like different type of end user coming behind the scene, or they can be like guests, they can be like high profile travelers with a lot of loyalty points. So they might want to be able to differentiate those different class of services. The two other categories that we see are coming like from specialized vertical, like for example, HCLS, which is healthcare and life science world, or the banking industry with FAPI over there. And what we are seeing is that there are a lot of requirements onto the fact that the communication should be initiated by clients that are authenticating of a certain way. And we need more information about that. Like if we want something that can ensure that it was GWT, private GWT authenticated, or using client cert through mTLS around that, we need to be able to know about it because we have to take action based on those regulations. Also, the other part is that was there like a consent involved onto that? Was there like a RAR or rich authorization request, which is like a more details authorization request that can go to the authorization server? We want to be sure that those has been performed behind the scene. And finally, we want also to be able to back up that with shared signal framework. Like if the risk change at the resource provider, we should be able to have like a different type of access control based on to that. So we need to be sure that you are always having the right characteristics that match the risk in order to protect those resources.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jeff. And actually, this is why we have some problems. In fact, when we're trying to apply access policies on any of this, we already know a lot about the user. We have a number of claims that can be added with the access token, and this can be used, for example, in PDP land where I live, to compute access policies. That's fine. But as Jeff you were saying, in some cases we need to be able to know more about the client, and we're lacking that information right now. So all that stuff that's coming from AS land to PDP land, for us to to compute access policies, well, we're actually missing a lot of information from the client, as we'll see. In particular, we would like to know things like ACR. Like we have ACR for the subjects, so we have ACR that provides information about the strengths of the authentication mechanism or process that was used to authenticate the process, and also the AMR, the authentication level or method that was used to authenticate the user. So combining those two methods, we can tell what level of assurance the user has reached. But we're kind of missing that for the client. We would like to know, for example, the type of authorization flow that was used for the client. Was it a device code, a client credential? Was it a CBA, a back channel? What kind of extensions were used? Were PKCE used, or was it RAR, JAP? Was there a proof of possession, DPOP used? Things like that. And also we want to see what kind of client authentication was there. Like, was there an assertion? Was it done through a private JAuth? These things could be important, especially when you look at standards like FAPI that require a fully secure channel throughout, right? And so this is why we would like to introduce some new claims for the JAuth tokens. And this slide here is the gist of it. So first, we'd like to introduce 4 new claims that would be added to the access token that would pertain to those client things that I just talked about. So the first one, GTI, would describe the grant flow that was used in order to authenticate, the client. So we'd have an authorization code, client credential grant, etc., etc. The second one, CTX, would describe the extensions used in that authorization flow. For example, PKCE, DPOP, RAR, PAR, JAR, etc. The third one, CCR, would describe the client authentication context. It's a bit like your ACR for the subject, but would have for client CCR. This would be defined by a custom namespace that would provide us some level of assurance for the client authentication itself. And finally, CMR, like AMR, would provide us some authentication methods that were used to authenticate the client, such as mTLS, JAuth, client secret, and so forth. So I think those 4 new claims would really help us build better access policies that are really enforcing security throughout the whole environment. Yeah?
So I think that one of the things that the discussions that we got during OSW and what we saw from the other um, RFCs and standards that were proposed over there is that the usage of the tip feed header. Okay, and what we saw is that there's like an explosion of those tip feed header, and I think it sounds like it's a little bit more complex for what we want to do. It's a great element to bring like a notion about what the token is about, but not necessarily a way to provide more information, and at least the information that we need over here. So that's why we are proposing those four claims, because I mean, who can tell me which one of those four values is the real one when we limit it based on to the way that those values can be shuffled around moving forward. The other way is that because we are working also onto the PDP side, the policy decision point, which can be behind the resource provider, anything which is into the header might not be available to this PDP. So that's why we are here trying to provide like a more changing posture onto the way that we can signal some of those information by normalizing it more into the token. And that will help us to solve the first part of the problem. Like if we know that there is which type of authentication that the client can have, we can now start to answer the question about those regulation, and we can start to have like maybe a differentiation in between those clients that are sending token to us, because other than knowing the client ID, we don't know this much. So it's great, and thank you for the proposal here, Alex. But what happens if the resource provider does not have those specific claims? How can he request it? So if we take a step back onto what the resource provider can do today, what we can see is that there is already a RFC that has been proposed by late Vittorio Bertocci, which is like RFC 9470, which can allow us to like request a higher level of authentication or a more recent authentication of the subject when like the access the tokens are issued by the authorization server. So that's great, because now it means that the resource server can say more than just yes and no, which is exactly what the policy decision point try to help the resource provider to be able to say. So we can see that we have like a foundation to try to provide more signaling over there. On the other side, what we see is that the client can have different way of interacting with the AS on top of the standard authorization request, and especially if we are looking at FAPI and those more evolved regulations, smart has also sign notes that RAR can be used over there. So we know we can use a rich authorization request. We know that if it need be, the client can make like a push authorization request, which is authenticated before making the authorization request in order to pass the different element onto that. We know that the information can also be passed into a JSON structure, which is what jar is for. So that's why we code those three specific standard, the XAR, RFC, over here, because that's something that we know the client can use to talk to the AS. So what we think now is that we should just connect the two worlds, because around the client, the resource provider on one side and the authorization server on the other side, to be sure that the signaling that can come in can signal more than just a re-authentication of the user, but can also trigger those different elements, because the client might not know, but the resource provider surely know, because the PDP will notify him about what needs to be done. And maybe we can just stop here and make a notion on how it will help. What is AuthZ, Alex, here?
So AuthZ is the protocol that, I mean, it's currently in its implementers draft. It's a standard within the OpenID Foundation. And the goal there is to make those policy decision point services or servers interoperable. So in other words, it provides a common language that all PDPs out there should understand. And so then they are easily pluggable. So in essence, a resource server would use AuthZ to ask security questions or access questions to a PDP. Similarly, an authorization service could do the same thing in the backend, as you can see in this diagram on the left side and on the right side.
Cool. So it means that through the results that the AuthZ request, the response that can be returned to the different policy enforcement point, then we can use that our own identity. So we want to act on through the element B here, because we want to be able to expand what B can answer. And for that, we got a very good discussion with Alex and with the person who was there at the OSW, which is, should we use 401 or should we use 403? It's an old debate, for sure. we have a proposition to that because we think that 403 like much more the fact that it's not a problem of authentication from the client. It's more on the authorization side that we are missing some bits and we might need more information in order to move forward. Yes, those extra authorization details will be represented as a new credential into a form of JSON web token that will be resubmitted for the request, but it feels more that it is like a 403. And if we look at the larger map, what we can see is that we will still respect the fact that a resource provider can answer along the old and legacy 401 and 403 HTTP response code over there without more details, but it will now liberate the resource provider onto this ability to provide more details about that. RFC 9470 is giving us more details when we are into the 401 use cases. You are unauthorized because your credential is not good enough for that, and you can effectively require like a more recent or higher assurance kind of credential over there. And what we are introducing here with our proposal is like to expand the 403 with the ability to ask for more details. And we are now passing a payload. Why are we passing a payload here, Alex?
Well, this actually is the AuthZ payload that PDP would return to the resource server, and that could actually be returned back to the client itself. Decision. So here, the example that we're showing here, the access was not granted. The decision is false, and as the context, we can provide what's missing or some additional details about what's required for the client to reach the sufficient level. I mean, you can find that in the header as well, but this can also provide additional information or context, such as like any AuthZ response, actually.
Cool. So that's really close the bridge onto that. So here we can see like the details for what we plan to propose as a proposal for the new potential RFC that we hope to be able to discuss with the different party at IETF. So what we want to have over here is to have two types of response. One type of response, which what we call bare response, which is like more indication, more details about what is happening onto the resource server side in order to be able to pass the access control gate. We will provide elements that might not be directly OAuth2 formatted or that might not be completely capable of being actioned by the client using the mechanism, but still we are providing single feedback, or we are going into a more XAR-oriented response, meaning that we will directly drive the client into creating this next RAR, PAR, using jar or not request to the authorization server in order to move forward. So what we are seeing here is that just like additional details for us to be able to shape like a better proposal against that we will submit to IETF and onto which we will start discussing and maybe iterating if we found sufficient interest for from the working group over there to be able to move forward. And now we can see that thanks to the new claims that we are proposing, and also to have the mechanism of exchange or communication to make like our resource provider a little bit more intelligent into the way that it is interacting with the client and behind the scene with the authorization server, we can try to solve all those different use cases. So maybe to like make the complete point to that, we can move to end-to-end example, Alex.
Yeah, let's have a look. Let's see how this would play out. So let's say that our friend Alice wants to read a confidential document that sits somewhere on the resource server. I mean, we know which resource server it sits on, but what happens then is Alice makes, first of all, the initial authorization request that you usually see in OAuth, and here we're authentication with an authorization code, and so she exchanges, well, the AS responds with a challenge, and Alice authenticates and uses TOTP to log in. Great. So now she gets an authorization code, and she can now exchange that code for an access token. So this is all as usual. And as you can see here, the request, there was a client secret that was provided by Alice. as well as a client ID. So this is how the Alice's client was actually authenticated. Alice uses that client to access her resource, and that's all we know about the client. Good. So from this, we got an access token back. Now, let's have a look at what's in this access token. As you can see, this access token has been augmented with some of our new claims, in particular GTI, which tells us that it was a client, sorry, the CMR, it's a client secret and client credentials grant. And this got us a level 1 of assurance for the client itself, not for Alice, but for the client. Good. So now using that, Alice can then make a request. I mean, the client that Alice uses makes a request to the resource server and passes that access token. The resource server then communicates with the policy decision point in the backend to determine if Alice is in fact authorized to access the protected document. Now, as you can see, this is the AuthZ request that the resource server makes in the backend to the PDP. It's a typical AuthZ request where you have, a subject, an action, a resource, and a context. The context just provides the time of day, just in case that's important for the access policy. And then you have the subject, the action, and the resource. Alice needs to get the document. Simple as that. Well, as it turns out, the context and the access policies are so that the request is denied because, in fact, this is not a trusted client. At this point, just using client secret is not enough. We need to make sure that we really are not in a kind of a kiosk or a mobile phone or something. We want a strong assurance that this is a protected client. And so the PDP responds with an AuthZ response that is false. And as part of the context of the response provides some details. And these details tell the client that it actually requires PKCE and a proof of possession in order to request this resource, as well as a JAuth type of authentication, another client secret. So the client,
and we can see over here that a PAR request is also it needs to be done
that's
through
right.
a PAR request.
That's correct. I forgot to mention that. As you can see that, absolutely. So then what happens then is the resource server responds to the client with a step-up authorization, which is this new flow, this new message that Jeff has been talking about. As you can see, the header is a 403 forbidden, but we also provide as the header elements that it's an insufficient authorization and that a different authorization is required. Now, the details of what is required are provided in the AuthZ response, which I've already described. And here we know that we need PAR, as well as PKCE DPOP and a JAOP type of authentication. The client now can, process that and starts and actually provide issue a PAR request using all the required elements. It provides, a PKCE for the and a proof of possession, as well as authenticates with the JAOT, and it submits all of this to the PAR endpoint of the authorization service. From that, it gets back, this URI for the request, which it then uses to make a new authorization request on the authorization service. But now that PAR request had all the required elements, and so because Alice had already logged in, the session is found by the AS, and therefore the AS redirects the client and to the token endpoint where the right proof of possession and the right assertions can be actually provided. Now that we have that, the client that Alice uses can make a proper request to the token endpoint of the AS, providing that proof of possession, providing the bearer token, and all the assertion and everything that was required. So given that, the AS now responds with a new access token. And if we have a look at this new access token now, we can see that those additional claims that we are introducing have been updated. Now the client itself has reached assurance level 2 and also has used PKCE, DPOP, and PAR. And also, by the way, it uses a JAOT to authenticate. Now the client can make the initial request again to the resource server, this time providing this new access token. Now the new AuthZ request is made to the PDP, and this time all the conditions are met, and therefore the response at that point is okay, great. And because of that, the resource server can now respond with the protected document to Alice.
So
Great.
it sounds like it can work if we are binding all together and we can really have like those back and forth and falls back to a negotiation, a little bit like we had for TLS now when we are all setting our secure servers over there. So yeah, like thanks Alex for that.
Absolutely. And it's the same type of flow you find already with that RFC 9470, where the resource server requests a step up from the user. Only this time it's the same thing, but for the client using those new flows. So as an alternate flow here, just to point out something that could have made things a bit smoother and faster, is that we could have failed early actually, because if we rewind to the point when the client first requested the token, the very first time when it had just authenticated with the secret, at that point already, the AS could have made a request via AuthZ to the PDP using the request itself, packaging itself the AuthZ request, and right away the AuthZ response would have told the AS that the authorization was insufficient. So the AS could have actually failed early and not have to hit the resource server right away. So if that integration was also in place, we could really smooth things out quite a lot.
Uh, what we found is that we might have like a mechanism that can serve and connect all the great stuff that has been created inside the OAuth2 world. If you remember the planet analogy that Alex was providing onto that, but also to like bridge with the other side of the planet, which is like the PDP land that Alex and I live in also when we are talking to customers. And that whatever the verticals that we are talking to customers, but some of them being more stringent than others. We know that there are also other initiatives like IPSI that try to formalize what are like the best QN practices for the enterprise and the minimum of features that needs to be found over there. So maybe there will be an interest to join us. As you can see, also there is a lot of evolution into the workload identity and especially into multi-system environment, WIMSI ecosystem, which is like the ability to integrate SPIFFE and Spire with the OAuth2 world. So that means that SPIFFE authentication, the SVID, will play a role into those kind of client authentication methods. So if we can reflect that, that would be interesting. This kind of negotiation also falls down to the establishment of maybe transaction token that can allow like a multiple workload to be able to understand that they are part of a larger transaction without needing to have like a lot of token exchange for having an access token differently each time. So we'll see what can happen to that. We know that there are like a lot of feature extension. GANAP as a state machine that might also connect to what we are trying to do over here. So we really think that we can have some proposals that can have a long life within this ecosystem. So call to guidance for action because we are only starting with that. The first thing that I will say is that join the OAuthZ working group if you feel that this is interesting and that you might have some say into the building and the formalization of that. You can also join the OAuth working group as part of ETF because IETF, sorry, because we will propose that as new RFC, especially in order to be able to register those claim extension. There are maybe like a lot of use cases that we didn't have seen, and for which that we will need some polishing onto the proposals that we are doing now to debate about the details in order to make sure that this is like really actionable and usable. So we are looking for people to join us. Don't hesitate to contact us. We are on LinkedIn. We are also part of the ID Pro community. So if you want to find us, you will surely do that. But there are also ways to be able to connect with us. I think you are going to EIC, Alex, right?
Yeah, that's correct, actually. In Berlin, beginning of May, we'll be there. If you're there, find me. I have a session there, but I'll be roaming around as always.
And I
And
think that
Jeff,
there will be OpenID Foundation AuthZ working group interop again,
that's
just like it had just happened at Gartner IAM London, right?
that's correct. We usually have a room there at the IC to do interop, so there'll be an interop there. It's always interesting to watch, even if you're not actually a vendor or participating. Just seeing how the interaction happens between all those various vendors, it's quite interesting.
If you want more information, just have to flash the QR code, which is just onto this line, will bring you to the EIC website. And I think next we are meeting each other again, like every year at Identiverse Las Vegas, Alex, right?
Yeah, that should be fun. We're both speaking there, and there's going to be another odds and interrupt there as well. If you're missing the IC one, there's your chance to see all that action again.
Cool. And finally, I think, like I said, we will move that into the RFC queue to pull the people over there to try to see if there is again interest into pursuing the proposals that we made at OSW. And if we are successful, then there will be the whole discussion to make it happen. Because at the moment, it's just a proposal. There is like no decision. It's not an RFC. The RFC process will decide what final shape and when it would have this final shape in order to move forward. So I'm just remembering to you the next two big dates for IETF, one which is in July in Madrid, and the other one which will be closer to home because I'm living in Montreal, so I'm super glad to have IETF being there in November. So if you want to join our conversation, please don't hesitate to do so. With this being said, any last word, Alex?
Well, no, thank you, Jeff. It was a pleasure. This is quite exciting. Looking forward to making this an actual RFC or set of RFCs.
Yeah, and I hope that we will have some hand and it will be more than the two of us
Oh, I'm
to be
sure.
able to deliver that. So
Yeah.
thanks again, Alex, and to the chance to meet you, viewers, wherever you will be for the next discussion. Have a great day.